Hello, and welcome back to Mr. Rockenstein's Flipped Classroom. This lesson is on division with decimal dividends. We have just one lesson goal today, and that is that you will be able to divide using a whole number divisor and a decimal dividend. So just a quick reminder of what those terms mean. The divisor is the number of groups we're going to have. And the dividend is the big number, or that big group, that we're dividing into smaller groups. We're going to be dividing it into a certain number of smaller groups. And the quotient is that answer. That's how much is going to be in each of those groups. So, when we're in number sentence form, the dividend comes first, then the divisor, then the quotient. Here's a number story that I want you to try as a practice problem. So I'm going to read it. How much should each nephew get? That's the question. Mr. Rockenstein wants to give his 3 nephews some money for their birthdays. He has $36.60 to give. How much should each nephew get? So right now, pause the video, work on this problem, get an answer that makes sense to you, and then start the video again and we'll compare. All right, so you've had a chance to do this problem on your own. And now I'm going to show you how I would do this problem. So I would set it up as a long division problem where my divisor is 3. That's how many groups I'm going to have. And those 3 groups are those 3 nephews. So nephew 1, nephew 2, nephew 3. And what I'm trying to figure out, my quotient is going to be how much money each of those 3 nephews is going to get. It needs to be an equal amount. Now, anytime I do a long division problem, I make sure to write DMSD right at the top of the paper to remind myself of the steps for long division. And those steps are divide, multiply, subtract, and drop. All right, so I start with divide. 3 goes into 3 one time. 1 times 3 is 3. Subtract. 3 minus 3 is 0. Drop down the 6. I start over again. How many 3's are there in 6? There are 2. 2 times 3 is 6. That was multiply. Now I'm going to subtract. 6 minus 6 is 0. Ready to drop down, so I drop down this 6. How many 3's are there in 6? There are 2. That's the divide step. Multiply. 2 times 3 is 6. Now I subtract. 6 minus 6 is 0. So now I have to take a look at my answer. Right now my answer looks like 122. So does that mean that each nephew is going to get $122? Does that make sense? Well, if I look back in my problem, I only had $36.60 to give. So it wouldn't really make sense for each nephew to get $122. That would end up being $366, and I only had $36.60 to give. So I know that doesn't make sense, and I need to do something to my answer to make it make more sense. So what I need to do is I need to find the right spot for that decimal point. And here's the great thing about doing decimal division where the only decimal is in your dividend. You can just bring the decimal point up. Just bring the decimal point up. So if I do that over here, my decimal point's right down here. If I've been careful, I can just make an arrow and I can just bring the decimal point up into the answer. And now 12.2 or 12 and 2/10, well, in money, that would be $12.20. And so I'm thinking that if every nephew gets $12.20, this is making a little bit more sense to me. I think this amount could actually work. So in order to check it, you can always check a division problem with a multiplication problem. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to do 12 and 2/10 times 3. Now, the amount I'm checking is $12.20, but when we do multiplication with decimals, we can just get rid of that 0 because 0 times 0 is 0, and it's not going to really make any difference to our answer. So 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 2 is 6, and 3 times 1 is 3. Now, just like in all decimal multiplication problems, I can't just bring that decimal point down. I have to count how many numbers are behind the decimal point, and that tells me where to put my decimal point. So I'm counting, I've got one number and one number only behind the decimal point. So that means I put my decimal in right here. I've got one number behind the decimal point. And this is the number that I was looking for, 3660. That's the amount of money that I had to give to my nephew. So it looks like I was right over here that $12.20 is how much each nephew is going to get. Now, the really important thing that we learned from doing this problem is that when you're doing division and the dividend has a decimal in it, all you have to do is at the end of the problem, just bring the decimal point up. You can just bring the decimal point up, and then you need to think to yourself, does my answer make sense? So you got to go back to your problem and think about whether your answer makes sense or not. All right, so here's another example problem that I want you to work on your own. But before you do that, you always have to remember that when you're doing long division, you need to have something on your paper, and that something is DMSD. Divide, multiply, subtract, drop. So there it is so that I don't forget my steps. And right now I want you to pause the video, work this problem, and then remember at the end, just bring the decimal point up. That's what you do. You just bring the decimal point up. So pause the video and work on this problem. Okay, so you've had a chance to work this problem on your own. Now I'm going to do it and you can compare your answer to mine. 5 goes into 3, 0 times. So we'll try 33. 5 goes into 33. That goes in there 6 times. So that's the divide part. Then multiply. 6 times 5 is 30. Now subtract. 3 minus 0 is 3. 3 minus 3 is 0. Now I bring down, and now I'm going to do 5 into 35. That's my divide part. How many 5s are there in 35? There are 7. 7 times 5, 35. Subtract, and I get nothing. So now I got to look up here, and I have to remember that I got to put that decimal point back in. And the easy thing is I just bring the decimal point up. So I'll go to my problem, and I'll just bring my decimal point up. And then my answer becomes 6.7. Now I have to think to myself, does my answer make sense? Well, 6.7, I can round 6.7 to just 7. And I can round 33.5, or sorry, I can just do my divisor here, I can just leave as 5. And I can think to myself, 7 times 5 equals 35. Now, is 35 close to 33.5? Yeah, it's close. So I know I'm in the ballpark, which means my decimal point is probably in the right place. If I put the decimal point here, then I would just have 0 and 67 hundredths. And that wouldn't even be close to 33.5. So then I can try putting my decimal point over here, and that would be 67.0, and 67 times 5 would be way more than 33. So by thinking about whether my answer makes sense or not, I think I can be safe and say that, yes, 6.7, which is almost 7, times 5 equals 35, which is close to 33.5. So that's the end of the lesson. Remember, you can always go back, rewind, look at things again, pause, make sure you're trying to understand what is going on. And just one more last time, the trick when you have a decimal dividend is just bring the decimal point up. All right, I'll see you next time.